In 1845, something invisible crept across the fields of Ireland. It didn't arrive with an army. It didn't carry weapons. It made no sound at all. Yet within weeks, entire landscapes turned black. Fields that had promised life only days before collapsed into rotting wastelands. Families walked outside, expecting another ordinary harvest, and instead found the only food they depended on dissolving into foul-smelling sludge beneath the soil. Parents watched their children grow weaker with every passing day. Villages emptied. Coffins became more common than bread. More than 1 million people would eventually die, while another million abandoned everything they had ever known in desperate search of survival. At the center of one of history's greatest humanitarian disasters stood something so ordinary that most of us barely think about it today: a potato. It sounds impossible that a humble underground vegetable could shape empires, fuel revolutions, trigger mass migrations, and even influence the future of human civilization. Yet few crops have left a deeper mark on history. The story of the potato isn't really about food. It's a story about survival, about human ingenuity, about greed, power, and tragedy. And it begins thousands of years before anyone in Europe had ever heard its name. Long before castles dominated Europe. Long before Rome became an empire. Long before the first pyramids had weathered centuries of desert winds. The towering Andes Mountains stretched across western South America, creating one of the harshest environments on Earth. The air was thin. The temperatures swung wildly between freezing nights and scorching days. Violent winds battered rocky slopes where very few plants could survive. To most people, these mountains looked almost impossible to inhabit. But for generations of indigenous communities, they were home. Life here demanded constant adaptation. Every meal had to be earned. Every season brought new challenges. Every mistake could mean starvation. Among scattered patches of rugged vegetation grew a strange little plant unlike anything cultivated today. Its small underground tubers looked nothing like the smooth golden potatoes sitting in modern supermarkets. Some were purple, others were almost black. Many were twisted into bizarre shapes. Most were incredibly bitter. And nearly all of them contained dangerous toxins. Eating these wild potatoes raw could cause severe illness, nausea, violent vomiting, painful stomach cramps. Large quantities could even become fatal. Nature had designed them to defend themselves against hungry animals. Unfortunately, humans weren't an exception. Yet despite the danger, the people living in the Andes refused to ignore this strange plant, because hunger has a remarkable way of changing how people think. When food is scarce, almost everything becomes worth investigating. Generation after generation began experimenting. Some roasted the tubers over open fires. Others buried them beneath hot stones. Most methods failed. The potatoes remained poisonous, but eventually someone made an extraordinary discovery. The rushing streams flowing down the mountains carried more than water. When wild potatoes soaked in these icy currents for several days, part of their bitterness disappeared. That alone wasn't enough, but it was the first clue. The mountains themselves revealed the next answer. Every night, temperatures dropped below freezing. Every morning, brilliant sunlight quickly thawed whatever had frozen hours earlier. People noticed that potatoes exposed to repeated cycles of freezing and thawing became less toxic. The combination worked. First, soak them, then freeze them, then thaw them, again and again. What looked like a simple survival technique was actually an astonishing scientific achievement. No one understood chemistry. No one knew about glycoalkaloids or plant toxins. There were no laboratories, no textbooks, no universities. Only careful observation passed from one generation to the next. Over centuries, these communities unknowingly mastered a process that allowed one of nature's most dangerous vegetables to become edible. But they didn't stop there. Once people could safely eat potatoes, another challenge appeared. How could they make them better? Every harvest included thousands of plants. Some produced larger tubers. Some tasted slightly sweeter. Others survived colder winters. Without realizing it, farmers began selecting the best potatoes and planting them again the following season. Year after year, century after century. Tiny improvements accumulated. The bitter potatoes slowly became less bitter. The poisonous varieties became safer. The harvests became larger. The plants adapted to different soils and elevations. It was evolution guided by human hands, thousands of years before anyone discovered genetics. These farmers were quietly practicing selective breeding with extraordinary precision. Each generation inherited not only seeds, but knowledge. Knowledge about which plants survived drought, which resisted disease, which stored longest, which produced the richest harvest. Slowly, almost invisibly, one of humanity's greatest agricultural transformations unfolded. The wild potato became something entirely new, a dependable food source. A crop capable of thriving where almost nothing else could. Unlike wheat, it didn't require vast open fields. Unlike rice, it needed no flooded paddies. Unlike corn, it tolerated freezing temperatures. It grew beneath the ground, protected from violent weather that destroyed many other crops. That hidden advantage would later change the course of history. For now, it simply meant survival. As villages expanded throughout the Andes, potatoes became woven into everyday life. Families measured seasons by planting and harvest. Children learned farming techniques before they could read. Festivals celebrated successful crops. Entire communities relied on this remarkable plant. But one problem remained. Fresh potatoes spoiled quickly. Without refrigeration, they rotted within weeks. For people living in isolated mountain regions where harsh winters often blocked travel, that posed a serious threat. A poor harvest could become a death sentence. Again, necessity forced innovation. The answer emerged from the mountains themselves. Farmers spread freshly harvested potatoes across the freezing ground overnight. By dawn, they had turned solid as stone, as the powerful daytime sun warmed them. Families walked across the frozen potatoes barefoot, squeezing moisture from inside the tubers. Then they repeated the process. Freeze dry, again and again. Days later, the result looked almost magical. The potatoes had transformed into lightweight, completely dried food that could survive for years without spoiling. Not weeks, not months, years. This preserved product became known as chuño. Today it might seem simple. 8,000 years ago, it was revolutionary. Communities could now store enormous quantities of food. Entire harvests became insurance against future disasters. Families no longer lived one failed season away from starvation. Armies could travel greater distances, carrying preserved supplies. Trade expanded. Population increased. For the first time, people gained true food security in one of Earth's most unforgiving environments. The potato wasn't simply feeding civilization anymore. It was helping create one. As generations passed, farming techniques became increasingly sophisticated. Terraces carved into steep mountainsides prevented erosion. Stone irrigation channels directed precious water toward crops. Different potato varieties were matched with specific elevations. Some thrived in freezing conditions. Others preferred warmer valleys. Each had its purpose. The diversity became astonishing. Hundreds, then thousands, of unique potato varieties appeared across the Andes. Some were tiny enough to fit inside a child's hand. Others grew surprisingly large. Their colors ranged from creamy white to deep blue, bright red, golden yellow, and nearly black. Modern grocery stores display only a tiny fraction of that incredible diversity. To the people of the Andes, potatoes weren't one crop. They were an entire world, different flavors, different textures, different cooking methods, different purposes. Agriculture had become both science and culture. The potato-shaped language, traditions, beliefs, and daily routines. Every successful harvest strengthened communities. Every improvement encouraged larger settlements. Food created stability. Stability created opportunity. Opportunity created civilization. By the time powerful kingdoms began emerging across Western South America, potatoes had already supported countless generations. What began as a poisonous wild plant had quietly become one of humanity's greatest agricultural achievements. But its influence was still confined to the Andes. The rest of the world remained completely unaware that one extraordinary crop was waiting beyond the mountains. Across distant oceans, civilizations continued building their futures around wheat, rice, barley, and millet. No one imagined another plant would eventually rival them all. That would soon change, because high in these mountains, a new civilization was rising with breathtaking speed. Its engineers would carve roads across impossible landscapes. Its builders would construct cities among the clouds. Its rulers would govern millions without written language or iron tools. And beneath every one of their greatest achievements, hidden beneath the soil, was the crop that made it all possible. The empire that would one day astonish Spanish conquerors wasn't built on gold. It wasn't built on silver. And it certainly wasn't built on military technology that surpassed the rest of the world. It was built on food. By the 15th century, the Inca Empire stretched for more than 500 miles along the western edge of South America. From modern-day Ecuador through Peru and into Chile, millions of people lived across mountains so steep that outsiders believed large-scale civilization there was impossible. Yet the Inca had achieved exactly that. Stone cities clung to cliffs. Roads crossed mountain passes higher than many airplanes fly today. Massive suspension bridges connected deep valleys. Government messengers traveled hundreds of miles in only a few days. For an empire without horses, wheels, or iron tools, it seemed almost unbelievable. But behind every remarkable achievement stood one simple reality. None of it could exist unless millions of people had enough food to eat. The potato made that possible. Unlike civilizations that relied almost entirely on one or two crops, the Inca cultivated astonishing diversity. Historians estimate they grew well over 3,000 different potato varieties. Some flourished above 13 zoos and feet where almost nothing else survived. Others preferred lower valleys with warmer temperatures. Each variety had evolved over generations to solve a different agricultural challenge. One resisted frost, another survived drought, another matured weeks earlier than the rest. If one failed, countless others remained. Without understanding genetics, the Inca had accidentally created one of history's greatest examples of agricultural resilience. It was an insurance policy written by nature itself. The empire's farmers understood their mountains better than anyone else on Earth. Every hillside became an opportunity. Instead of fighting the landscape, they transformed it. Thousands of stone terraces climbed impossible slopes like giant staircases, disappearing into the clouds. These terraces prevented erosion. They trapped moisture. They controlled temperature. Even today, many of them remain intact after more than 500 years. Modern engineers still admire their precision. Each level created a tiny microclimate. A potato planted only a few hundred feet higher might experience completely different weather than one below it. The Inca used those differences to their advantage. Every altitude served a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Agriculture wasn't simply farming. It was engineering. It was environmental science. It was survival on a continental scale. The empire stored enormous quantities of food inside state warehouses scattered throughout the mountains. Some historians estimate tens of thousands of these storage buildings existed across Inca territory. Inside them sat dried potatoes, corn, quinoa, and other supplies carefully preserved against famine. The famous chuño remained one of their greatest innovations. Unlike fresh potatoes, it weighed very little. It lasted for years. It required no refrigeration. When armies marched, they carried chuño. When drought struck, families survived because of chuño. When harvests failed, entire provinces relied on government food reserves. For the Inca, food wasn't only about eating. It was about stability. It was about political power. A ruler who could feed people earned loyalty. An empire that could survive disasters remained strong. In many ways, potatoes became as important as soldiers, perhaps even more important. Because hungry armies don't win wars, fed armies do. The Inca road systems stretched over 25,000 miles. Messengers called chasqui ran across those roads carrying information between distant cities. They stopped at relay stations where fresh runners immediately continued the journey. Messages traveled hundreds of miles with astonishing speed, but information alone couldn't maintain such a system. Every relay station required food. Every worker required food. Every construction project required food. Once again, potatoes quietly powered everything behind the scenes. Most people never noticed. History often celebrates kings. It celebrates battles. It celebrates monuments. Rarely does it celebrate the crops that made those achievements possible. Yet without reliable agriculture, even the greatest empire collapses. The Inca understood that better than almost anyone. They honored mountains. As sacred, they respected the changing seasons. Their farming calendar blended practical knowledge with spiritual belief. Successful harvests meant life. Failed harvests meant suffering. Every potato planted represented hope. Children grew up learning which varieties belonged in rocky soil. Older farmers recognized approaching weather simply by studying clouds drifting over distant peaks. Knowledge accumulated over centuries became one of the empire's greatest treasures. Then strangers arrived from across the ocean. They didn't understand the mountains. They didn't understand the farming techniques, and they certainly didn't understand the value of the potato. In 1532, Francisco Pizarro and fewer than 200 Spanish soldiers entered the Inca Empire. On paper, the conquest should have been impossible. Millions of Inca, only hundreds of Spaniards. Yet, disease had already devastated local populations before many Europeans even arrived. Civil war weakened the empire further. Political divisions created opportunities for conquest. Within only a few years, one of history's greatest civilizations collapsed. Spanish soldiers searched relentlessly for precious metals. Temples were stripped of gold. Silver disappeared into European ships. Anything valuable enough to enrich The Spanish crown received immediate attention. The potato did not. To the conquerors, it looked ugly. It grew underground. It lacked beauty. It held no obvious financial value. Compared with glittering treasures, it seemed insignificant. Ironically, the crop they ignored would eventually become far more valuable than the gold they stole. At first, potatoes served only a practical purpose aboard Spanish ships. Long voyages often lasted months. Fresh food spoiled quickly. Sailors developed scurvy from vitamin deficiencies. Potatoes lasted longer than many vegetables and provided valuable nutrition. No royal celebrations welcomed their arrival in Europe. No noble families demanded them. No merchants grew rich selling them. They arrived quietly, almost unnoticed. Around the late 16th century, small quantities reached Spain. From there, they slowly spread toward Italy, France, Germany, England, and the Low Countries. But Europe didn't embrace them, it rejected them. To understand why, we have to imagine Europe through the eyes of someone living 400 years ago. People trusted familiar crops. Wheat represented civilization. Bread symbolized prosperity. Fields of grain stretched toward heaven beneath open skies. The potato did the opposite. It hid underground. It emerged covered in dirt. Its twisted shape resembled disease. Its strange eyes unsettled people. Worse still, botanists discovered it belonged to the same plant family as deadly nightshade. That single fact terrified many Europeans. If poisonous relatives existed, perhaps the potato itself was dangerous. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed potatoes caused terrible illnesses. Others insisted they corrupted the body. Many believed they encouraged laziness. Religious leaders questioned whether people should eat a plant never mentioned in the Bible. Fear spread much faster than facts. Entire regions refused to plant them. Some governments discouraged cultivation altogether. The potato became one of Europe's most misunderstood foods. Ironically, wealthy aristocrats admired the flowers while refusing to eat the tubers. Elegant white and purple blossoms decorated royal gardens. People praised their beauty. Meanwhile, the nutritious food growing beneath those flowers remained untouched. It was one of history's strangest contradictions. Europe struggled with recurring famines. Harvest failures killed thousands. Yet one of the world's most productive crops already sat within reach. Almost nobody wanted it. Years turned into decades. Decades became generations. The potato remained an outsider. It survived mostly in botanical collections, monastery gardens, and among a handful of curious farmers willing to experiment. Most Europeans still viewed bread as civilized. Potatoes belonged to peasants, or worse, to animals. No one realized history was preparing to force an extraordinary change. Because war was coming. Population was growing. Food shortages became increasingly common. Traditional agriculture struggled to feed expanding cities. The crop everyone mocked was about to become the one everyone desperately needed. And when that moment arrived, kings, scientists, and ordinary farmers would begin fighting not against the potato, but for it. People rarely abandon centuries of tradition willingly. They change only when survival leaves them no other choice. By the early 18th century, Europe faced a growing crisis. Its population was increasing faster than its farms could feed it. Cities expanded, armies grew larger. More mouths demanded bread every single year. But grain harvests were unpredictable. One unusually cold spring, one summer drought, one invasion, and entire regions could slip into famine. Kings began searching for solutions. Most found the answer hidden beneath their feet. Few rulers understood the potato's potential earlier than Frederick II of Prussia, better known as Frederick the Great. Unlike many European monarchs, Frederick wasn't interested in appearances. He cared about efficiency. He understood that hungry people couldn't fight wars, pay taxes, or strengthen a nation. His kingdom spent decades trapped in almost constant conflict. Enemy armies often burned wheat fields to starve civilians into surrender. It was an old military strategy. Feed the food. Destroy the country. But potatoes created a completely different problem for invading armies. They grew underground. A field of wheat announced itself from miles away. A potato field looked almost empty. An enemy could march directly across it without realizing thousands of meals were hidden beneath the soil. Frederick immediately recognized the military advantage. In 1756, he ordered farmers throughout Prussia to begin growing potatoes. The reaction was exactly what he feared. People refused. Many still believed potatoes caused disease. Others insisted they were suitable only for livestock. Some claimed they had no taste at all. Years of rumors proved stronger than royal commands. Frederick realized force alone wouldn't change public opinion, so he turned psychology into a weapon. According to one of history's most famous legends, the king planted a royal potato field near Berlin. Then he surrounded it with armed guards. The guards didn't actually stop anyone. They simply made the field appear valuable. Naturally, people became curious. If soldiers protected these strange plants, they must be worth stealing. Night after night, villagers quietly entered the field and stole potatoes to grow themselves, exactly as Frederick intended. Whether every detail of that story happened exactly as described remains debated, but the outcome is undeniable. Within a single generation, potatoes spread rapidly across Prussia. The crop people once rejected became a national necessity. Meanwhile, another remarkable story unfolded across the border in France. A young pharmacist named Antoine Augustin Parmentier never planned to become history's greatest potato advocate. War changed his life. During the 7 Years' War, Parmentier was captured by Prussian forces. For years, he survived almost entirely on potatoes. When he finally returned to France, something surprised him. He wasn't sick. He wasn't poisoned. He was healthier than many soldiers eating traditional French diets. Everything his country believed about potatoes suddenly seemed ridiculous. Parmentier dedicated his life to changing public opinion. He published research proving potatoes were nutritious. He organized elaborate dinners where every course featured potatoes prepared in different ways: soup, bread, pastries, stews, even desserts. Guests arrived expecting disaster. Most left amazed, but Parmentier understood facts alone rarely change minds. People follow fashion, so he persuaded King Louis XVI to wear potato flowers in his clothing. Queen Marie Antoinette placed them in her hair. If royalty celebrated potatoes, perhaps ordinary citizens should too. It was one of history's earliest examples of brilliant public relations. The strategy worked. Slowly, French attitudes began changing. What once symbolized poverty gradually became fashionable. Farmers planted more fields, families experimented with new recipes, markets expanded. The potato quietly conquered Europe, not through force, but through necessity. As more countries embraced the crop, something extraordinary happened. Food became cheaper. Harvests became larger. Children survived infancy more often. Life expectancy increased. Entire populations exploded. An acre of potatoes produced several times more calories than an acre of wheat. Even small plots of land could feed large families. For poor farmers, it felt almost miraculous. Nowhere was that miracle more dramatic than Ireland. By the early 19th century, much of Ireland existed under British rule. Most Irish families owned little or no land. Instead, they rented tiny plots from wealthy landlords. These plots were often too small to grow enough grain for survival. But potatoes changed everything. A single acre could feed an entire family for nearly a year. The crop thrived in Ireland's cool, wet climate. Poor soil didn't matter much. Expensive equipment wasn't necessary. Families needed little more than seed potatoes and a shovel. Within decades, the Irish population exploded. Around 3 million people at the beginning of the 18th century grew to well over 8 million by the 1840s. It was one of Europe's fastest population increases. The potato made it possible. But hidden beneath that success lay an invisible danger. Nearly every farmer planted the same variety, the Irish lumper, season after season, year after year. Fields across the country became genetically identical. At first, nobody worried. Why would they? The harvests were excellent. Children were healthy. Food seemed secure. The very strength of the system concealed its greatest weakness. Nature has always punished dependence. Whenever one solution appears perfect, it usually isn't. Late in the summer of 1845, disaster arrived from across the Atlantic. Microscopic spores of a destructive organism reached Europe aboard infected plants. Its name meant nothing to farmers. They simply called it blight. The disease spread with terrifying speed. Healthy green leaves turned dark almost overnight. Stems collapsed. Entire fields blackened within days. When farmers dug into the soil hoping to save something, their potatoes had already dissolved into foul-smelling decay. The smell lingered across entire counties. People watched months of hard work vanish before their eyes. Many believed the following year would be better. It wasn't. The blight returned, again and again. Each season proved worse than the last. Families exhausted every reserve they possessed. Livestock disappeared. Furniture was sold. Clothing was traded for scraps of food. Eventually, nothing remained. Starvation spread faster than anyone imagined possible. Pettikrents skipped meals so children might survive. Children died anyway. Diseases followed hunger, typhus, cholera, dysentery. Entire villages emptied. Workhouses overflowed. Mass graves filled faster than they could be dug. Between 1845 and 1852, roughly 1 million people died. Another million fled Ireland forever. Ships packed with desperate families crossed the Atlantic. Conditions were horrifying. Disease spread rapidly. Many passengers never reached America alive. The vessels became known as coffin ships. Those who survived arrived with almost nothing except hope. Cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Montreal, and Toronto suddenly welcomed enormous waves of Irish immigrants. Many faced discrimination. Many found only poverty. But over generations, they transformed their new countries forever. Irish communities shaped politics, built railroads, worked factories, ginged police departments, founded businesses, influenced literature, music, and culture across the English-speaking world. One failed crop had reshaped global history, yet the tragedy wasn't caused by disease alone. Political decisions made everything far worse, even while ordinary Irish families starved. Food continued leaving Ireland, ships loaded with grain, butter, meat, and livestock sailed toward England under military protection. Aid programs arrived slowly. Relief often required impossible labor from already starving people. Many historians argue the famine became catastrophic, not simply because potatoes failed, But because governments failed, the scars remain visible even today. Ireland's population has still never fully recovered to its pre-famine level. Entire regions emptied during those terrible years. Many villages disappeared forever. Yet history drew another lesson from the catastrophe. The problem wasn't the potato itself. The problem was dependence on a single variety. Scientists across Europe began developing stronger potato strains. Farmers planted multiple varieties instead of one. Agricultural research expanded dramatically. The greatest disaster in potato history became the beginning of modern crop science. Ironically, the famine strengthened the potato's importance instead of destroying it. The world finally understood two unforgettable truths. A single crop could feed millions, and placing all hope in one harvest could destroy them just as quickly. By the end of the 19th century, potatoes had become one of humanity's most important foods. But their journey was still far from over. The crop that had transformed kingdoms survived superstition and witnessed one of history's greatest tragedies, was about to conquer the entire planet. The Great Irish Famine permanently changed how the world thought about agriculture. For thousands of years, farmers had trusted experience more than science. If a crop produced good harvests, they planted it again. If it failed, they searched for another. But after watching an entire nation collapse because nearly every field contained the same variety of potato, governments and scientists reached an unavoidable conclusion. Nature rewards diversity. Dependence invites disaster. Across Europe and North America, researchers began collecting potato varieties from different regions of the world. Some resisted disease, others survived drought. Some tolerated freezing temperatures, others matured weeks earlier than normal. Plant breeders spent decades crossing different varieties, searching for stronger and healthier plants. What had once been an ordinary vegetable slowly became one of agriculture's greatest scientific projects. Seed banks appeared. Agricultural colleges expanded. Governments invested heavily in research. The potato had become far too important to leave entirely in nature's hands. Meanwhile, its influence continued, spreading across the globe. Russia had resisted potatoes almost as fiercely as France once had. Many peasants believed they were cursed. Religious leaders warned against eating them. Entire villages protested when officials attempted to force potato cultivation. Some historians even refer to these uprisings as the potato riots, but hunger eventually proved stronger than superstition. By the late 19th century, potatoes had become one of Russia's most important staple foods. Farmers gave them a nickname that revealed everything: the second bread. No compliment could have been greater. In China, potatoes arrived through traders and missionaries centuries earlier. At first, few people cared. Rice dominated agriculture. It had done so for thousands of years. But China's mountainous western provinces presented a familiar challenge. Rice struggled at high elevations. Potatoes did not. Farmers quickly realized they could grow reliable harvests where almost no other major crop succeeded. The transformation was astonishing. Today, China produces more potatoes than any other nation on Earth. Every year, tens of millions of tons leave Chinese farms. A crop once unknown across Asia became essential to feeding the world's largest population. India experienced a similar story. Introduced during the colonial period, potatoes slowly entered local agriculture before becoming deeply woven into everyday cooking. Today, it is almost impossible to imagine Indian cuisine without dishes featuring potatoes. Aloo gobi, aloo paratha, samosas, pav bhaji, countless regional recipes rely on a vegetable that originally evolved thousands of miles away in the Andes. Sometimes history travels quietly. Africa followed its own path. Countries like Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, and Ethiopia discovered that potatoes flourished in cool highland climates. Small farms produced remarkable harvests from limited land. International organizations recognized the crop's potential to reduce hunger across developing nations. Agricultural programs encouraged farmers to increase potato production. For millions of families, higher yields meant better nutrition, more reliable income, greater food security. By the 21st century, potatoes had become one of humanity's most successful crops. Only wheat, rice, and corn surpassed them in global production. Every year, hundreds of millions of tons are harvested across more than 150 countries. Few plants have ever spread so completely around the world. Yet food represents only part of the potato's remarkable story. Most people know potatoes because of what appears on their dinner plate: French fries, mashed potatoes, roasted potatoes, potato chips. But behind the scenes, this humble vegetable powers industries. Most people never notice. Potato starch helps manufacture paper. It strengthens textiles. It appears in biodegradable plastics. It improves adhesives. It even plays a role in pharmaceutical products. During the Second World War, shortages forced engineers to search for alternative industrial materials. Potato starch became part of efforts to produce synthetic rubber used in military equipment. A simple crop unexpectedly supported modern industry during one of history's largest conflicts. Even postage stamps have relied on potato-derived adhesives. Cosmetics use potato ingredients. Animal feed incorporates potato byproducts. The influence of this underground vegetable extends far beyond agriculture. Then, in 1995, the potato achieved something no previous crop had ever accomplished. It left Earth. Scientists working with NASA successfully grew potatoes during space research designed to support future long-duration missions. At first glance, the experiment sounded almost amusing. Why potatoes? The answer was surprisingly practical. Potatoes produce enormous amounts of calories using relatively little land. They require less water than many staple crops. They adapt to difficult environments. They store well after harvest, for astronauts living months, or perhaps years. Away from Earth, those advantages become incredibly valuable. Today, scientists planning future missions to the Moon and Mars continue studying potatoes as one of humanity's best candidates for space agriculture. Think about how extraordinary that journey truly is. 8,000 years ago, wild poisonous plants clung to rocky mountain slopes high above the clouds. Ancient farmers patiently transformed them into food. The Inca built one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas upon their harvests. Spanish conquerors ignored them while chasing gold. Europe feared them. Religious leaders condemned them. Kings promoted them. Scientists studied them. Famines revealed both their incredible power and their terrifying risks. Millions survived because of them. Millions also suffered when they failed. They crossed oceans, fed empires, reshaped nations, changed economies, inspired scientific revolutions. And one day, they may help feed the first human beings born on another planet. History often celebrates emperors, inventors, explorers, and generals. But sometimes the greatest force shaping civilization isn't a king. It isn't a weapon. It isn't an empire. Sometimes it's a quiet plant growing unnoticed beneath the soil. Every time someone enjoys a serving of fries, slices potato chips, or prepares mashed potatoes for dinner, they're participating in a story that began 8,000 years ago in the freezing Andes Mountains. A story of survival, innovation, mistakes, resilience, and extraordinary human determination. The potato never sought greatness. It simply grew where few other crops could survive. Humanity did the rest. Few foods have traveled farther. Few have influenced more lives. And perhaps no ordinary vegetable has ever changed the course of history quite like the potato.